Hey besties, welcome back to Maggie Stories. What would you do if your husband boss called on a Saturday morning and yelled at him like you didn't exist?
The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains in soft gold ribbons, the kind of Saturday light that felt like a personal gift from God. Seoul was quiet outside their window, or at least as quiet as Seoul ever got, and Wendy Jackson Choi had absolutely zero plans to be a functioning adult before 10 o'clock. She was warm. She was comfortable. She was tucked into the side of her husband like she had been architecturally designed to fit there, her head against his chest, one of his arms draped over her back in that half-asleep, completely instinctive way he always held her, like even unconscious. He knew she was the most important thing in the room. The duvet was a cloud. The room smelled like the vanilla candles she'd burned last night and something clean and familiar that was just him. There was nowhere on earth. Not Santo Domingo, not Atlanta, not any rooftop terrace she'd ever stood on. That felt more like home than this. Choi Juno was asleep. Really asleep. The kind of deep, boneless sleep that a man only falls into when his body has finally surrendered after too many nights of not getting nearly enough of it. She'd noticed the circles under his eyes getting darker over the past few weeks. Had noticed him coming home later, eating less, sitting at the edge of their bed in the dark sometimes when he thought she was asleep, shoulders carrying something heavy he hadn't handed her yet. She'd made a note of all of it. Wendy noticed everything. She had just shifted, pressing closer, deciding against all logic that she could fall back asleep for another solid 2 hours, when his phone exploded. Not rang, not buzzed gently. Exploded. The ringtone she'd assigned to unknown numbers was a full alarm, loud, persistent, aggressive, and it yanked both of them out of the warmth and the silence and the golden Saturday light like a bucket of ice water poured directly on their peace. Juno flinched awake, disoriented, his hand already reaching for the phone. On instinct, work instinct, the kind trained into a man who had been conditioned to respond immediately, no matter the hour, no matter the day. Wendy was already sitting up, hand on his arm. Baby, it's Saturday. I know. His voice was rough with sleep. He looked at the screen. His face did something she didn't like. A flicker of something that wasn't quite fear but was neighboring it. He sat up. He answered. She listened. She couldn't hear every word clearly at first, but she didn't need to. She could hear the tone. Loud, clipped, impatient. The voice on the other end of that phone was not calling to apologize for the hour. It was not checking in. It was issuing demands with the casual authority of someone who had never once considered that the man on the other end of the line was a human being with a wife and a Saturday and a body that needed rest. She watched Juno's spine straighten, watched him shift into that mode, the professional, composed, accommodating mode that he wore like armor at that job. Yes, sir. I understand. I can pull the files and... He paused. The voice cut him off. He tried again. The LIM account presentation isn't until Tuesday, so if I have the... Cut off again. Yes, I'll be there by 10. He hung up. Wendy stared at him. He didn't look at her right away. He was already mentally halfway out the door, already running calculations, already shifting from husband to employee, from their Saturday to his boss's Saturday. Juno. It's fine, one. I didn't ask if it was fine. I asked. She stopped. Breathed. I didn't even ask anything yet. But I'm about to. He finally looked at her. And she saw it then. Not just the tiredness, but something underneath it. Something older and more worn down than one bad morning. He gave her a small, apologetic smile, the kind that was meant to close the conversation before it opened, and stood up from the bed. It's an important account. He needs the analysis pulled before the weekend review. I'll be back by dinner. He yelled at you. Juno was already moving toward the bathroom. He's direct. It's how he communicates. He yelled at you, Wendy said again, slowly, precisely, as if she was filing the information somewhere important inside herself. On a Saturday morning, she glanced at the clock, 7:43 a.m., while we were asleep. Wendy, I'm not doing anything. I'm just noting the facts. He paused in the doorway and looked back at her, and she gave him the most serene, unbothered smile she had in her entire arsenal. He knew that smile. He had a complicated relationship with that smile. I'll make you breakfast before you go, she said sweetly. He visibly relaxed. Yeah, of course. You're my husband. Go shower. He went. And Wendy sat in the middle of their bed, in the golden Saturday light, and let her smile drop completely. She made him a full breakfast. Eggs done the way he loved them. Perfectly soft, with a little heat because he'd developed a taste for it since living with her. Fresh juice. The good coffee, not the automatic drip, the kind she made in the pour-over because she knew he could taste the difference even though he always said he couldn't. She packed half of it into a container because she knew that by the time he got through traffic and into that office, the breakfast they were supposed to have together would be cold on the table. She kissed him at the door, held his face in her hands for a moment, looked at him properly. "You work so hard," she said. It wasn't a complaint. It was an observation. He covered her hands with his. "It's temporary. We're close to a big close on the limb deal. Once that's done. She kissed him again. "Go. Text me when you're there." She watched him get into the elevator, waited until the doors closed. Then she turned around, walked back to the kitchen, poured herself a full cup of the good coffee, sat down at the island and opened her laptop. Wendy Jackson Choi did not panic. She did not spiral. She did not cry or vent or call her best friend to complain. What she did, what she had always done, what her mother had taught her and her grandmother had demonstrated and the women in her family had made into something close to an art form, was research. She typed in the name of the firm first. Choi Juno had been there for 4 years. 4 years was long enough to build a paper trail. She pulled up everything that was publicly available: business news, deal announcements, merger completions, contract wins. She wasn't surprised by what she found. She was impressed, actually. The firm had had an extraordinary 4 years. Deals closed, partnerships secured, clients retained at a rate that the industry had taken notice of. Then she got specific. She pulled the deal records she could access, cross-referenced the press releases with the internal announcements she'd occasionally glimpsed on his laptop screen when he'd fallen asleep working at the kitchen counter. She thought about every dinner party they'd attended, every offhand comment she'd caught from his colleagues when they'd had a little too much to drink and started talking freely. She thought about the way the senior partners always reached for Juno in a crisis, the way clients specifically requested him, the way the firm's biggest wins always seemed to be preceded by weeks of Juno not sleeping. She thought about 7:43 in the morning, and a voice she'd never heard before that had spoken to her husband the way you speak to someone you own. By the time her coffee was finished, Wendy had a very clear picture. Her husband was not an employee at that firm. He was, functionally, the engine of it. He was the reason deals closed. He was the reason clients stayed. He was the reason the firm's name was appearing in industry publications with increasing frequency. He brought them excellence, delivered consistently, and in return received a salary that was good but not extraordinary. A title that did not reflect his actual contribution, and a boss who called him on Saturday mornings at 7:43 and yelled. She closed the laptop very quietly. She picked up her phone and opened the Notes app. She had a real estate showing on Monday, 3 properties, a new development in Mapo that she'd been in conversation with the building owner about for 2 months. She moved that meeting. Then she opened her calendar and looked at the week ahead. She was going to need an appointment. Juno came home at 8:17 that evening. She had made oxtail stew, the real kind, the slow-cooked all-afternoon kind, the recipe that had been in her family long before they left the Dominican Republic and long before she was born, the one she only made when something needed to be felt in the eating of it. The apartment smelled extraordinary. The table was set. There was music playing, his playlist, not hers, the mellow Korean indie he put on when he needed to decompress. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen and just looked at her for a moment. "Hi," he said. He sounded exhausted. "Hi yourself." She handed him a glass of water first, because she knew he never drank enough when he was in work mode, then steered him toward the table. "Sit. I've got the food." "Wendy, you didn't have to." "Sit, Juno." He sat. She served him. She sat across from him. She watched him take the first bite and watched something in his shoulders descend about 3 inches. She did not bring up the phone call. She asked about his day in general, let him talk at whatever pace he chose, laughed at the one mildly funny thing that had happened with a junior associate, and refilled his bowl without being asked. She let dinner be what dinner was supposed to be. A place to land, not a place to interrogate. It was only later, when they were on the couch, his head in her lap while some show played in the background that neither of them was actually watching, that she ran her hand gently across his forehead and said, very casually, "Do you want to tell me what's actually been going on at work?" He was quiet for a long moment. It's nothing I can't handle. I know you can handle it. That's not what I asked. Another silence. Then, quietly, so quietly she had to lean down a little to hear him. He's been difficult for a while now. It's not just today. He's been pushing for more output, more hours, reassigning things to me that should go to the full team, and then he stopped. Started again. The Lim account. I built that relationship from scratch. 18 months. The client asks for me specifically. But he keeps inserting himself into the final meetings and repositioning it as his strategy. A pause. It's fine. I need to figure out the right moment to address it. Wendy kept her voice completely even. Of course. I just don't want to make it into a bigger thing than it needs to be. That makes sense. He looked up at her. She was smiling down at him, warm and calm and fully present, and he visibly relaxed into it, turned back toward the screen. You're the best, you know that? He murmured. I do know that, she agreed. Get some rest. He was asleep within 20 minutes. Wendy stayed very still so she wouldn't wake him, and stared at the ceiling, and thought about an appointment she was going to make tomorrow. Monday came the way Wendy liked her plans. Quietly, without announcing itself, dressed like an ordinary day. She was up before Juno, which was unusual enough that he stirred when he felt her side of the bed empty and reached across to find nothing. She heard him murmur something, heard the rustle of sheets, and leaned back through the bedroom doorway to find him squinting at her in the early gray light like a man personally offended by consciousness. Go back to sleep, she said. I have a showing at 9. I'll leave coffee. He made a sound that was approximately human and pulled the duvet back over his head. She smiled, turned back to the mirror, and finished getting dressed. She had thought carefully about what to wear. Not anxiously. Wendy did not do anxious, but with the same deliberate attention she gave every appearance that was meant to communicate something. Today she chose a deep burgundy wide-leg trouser suit with a structured blazer that sat perfectly on her shoulders, a silk blouse underneath in a warm cream, and heels that were elegant without being theatrical. Gold earrings, simple, architectural. A watch. She confirmed in the mirror like someone with money, with taste, and with absolutely no time for nonsense, which was precisely the impression she intended to make. She left Juno's coffee in the press with a note that said eat something real, not just that protein bar, I will know. She signed it with a small drawn heart because she was still herself, even on the days she was also something else entirely. The appointment had been booked under the name W. Park. Not a lie technically. Her neighbor's surname was Park, and Wendy had borrowed it with the casual creativity of a woman who had once talked her way into a sold-out concert in Atlanta using nothing but confidence and a very convincing story. The firm's receptionist had asked for a company name. Wendy had said Park Capital Group, in a tone so assured that the woman had typed it without a single follow-up question. She had described the inquiry as a private wealth consultation regarding potential investment partnerships. That was the language she'd seen on the firm's website, investment partnerships. She had used it back at them like a key in a lock, and the door had opened on a Wednesday for a 45-minute slot with the managing director himself. She had then moved it to Monday, because Wendy did not wait when she had already decided something. The firm occupied the top 3 floors of a building in Uedo that was trying very hard to communicate power and doing a reasonable job of it. Glass, steel, a lobby that echoed. The kind of architecture that was specifically designed to make you feel slightly smaller than you were before you walked in. Wendy walked in, looked around once, and was visibly unimpressed in the way only someone genuinely unimpressible can be. Not performed, not put on, just utterly unbothered by the square footage. The receptionist at the front desk was young, polished, and startled by her in the specific way people were sometimes startled by Wendy before she'd said a single word. It wasn't hostility. It was just that Wendy occupied space at a frequency that was hard to ignore. W. Park, Wendy said pleasantly. I have a 10 o'clock with Director Shin. The receptionist checked, found it, smiled with professional warmth. Of course. Can I get you anything while you wait? Water, coffee. I'm fine, thank you. She sat in the waiting area, crossed one leg over the other, and pulled out her phone. She had 3 messages from clients, one from her business partner about the Mapo development, and one from Juno that said I ate eggs. You happy? She typed back extremely and put the phone away. She was not nervous. This was important to understand about Wendy Jackson Choi. She was not a woman who performed calmness over anxiety. She was simply, structurally, not afraid of men who sat behind large desks. She had grown up watching her grandmother negotiate in 2 languages with contractors who underestimated her. She had watched her mother walk into rooms and rearrange them without raising her voice. Fear of men in suits was not something that had ever been installed in her. A different assistant, Senior Crisper, appeared and led her down a corridor past glass-walled conference rooms, past rows of associates who were all working with the particular hunched intensity of people who had long ago stopped tracking time by the clock and started tracking it by deliverable. She glanced through the glass as she passed. She clocked the energy in those rooms. Tight, tired. The specific atmosphere of a place where the expectations had been stretched past reasonable and everyone had quietly agreed not to say so. She knew this place. She'd seen it in her husband's eyes for months. The assistant stopped at a corner office. Knocked twice. Opened the door. Director Shin Byung-go was not what she'd expected physically. She'd constructed a version of him in her head that was larger, somehow more imposing. In reality, he was a man in his mid-50s, trim, with silver at his temples and the particular expression of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any given room. He stood when she entered, which was either manners or strategy, and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Ms. Park." He smiled. It was a business smile practiced, calibrated. "Welcome. I understand you're exploring investment partnership opportunities." Wendy sat down. She set her bag on the adjacent chair. She folded her hands in her lap, and she looked at him for just a moment longer than was comfortable before she smiled back. "I appreciate you making time," she said. Her voice was warm, clear, and carried the specific unhurried rhythm of a woman who had decided exactly how this meeting was going to go. "I do want to be upfront with you, though. I should clarify who I am, since I think there may have been some confusion with the booking." He blinked, just slightly. "Oh, my name is Wendy Jackson Choi." She let that land. Watched his face process the second name. Watched the moment it connected. "Choi Juno is my husband." The smile didn't fall completely, but it shifted, recalibrated. He leaned back slightly in his chair, and she could see him rearranging the situation in his head, trying to identify what category this fell into, what the appropriate register was, how much concern was warranted. "I see," he said carefully. "Well, Mrs. Choi, if there's something regarding your husband's employment that you'd like to—" "Oh, I have several things," Wendy said brightly. "But let me start by saying you have a beautiful office. Really, the view of the river is lovely." She glanced toward the window and back. "Must be nice to enjoy it while your staff works weekends." He opened his mouth. "Saturday," she continued, with the cheerful momentum of a woman who had not come here to have a conversation. She had come here to deliver one. 7:43 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was in bed with my husband, which is where people tend to be on Saturday mornings, and your call woke both of us up. And I want to be clear, it wasn't the call that bothered me. It was the tone. She tilted her head. "Do you speak to all your employees like that? Or is my husband a special case?" "Mrs. Choi, I did some reading this weekend." She reached into her bag and produced a small, neat folder. Not thick, not theatrical. Just organized. Wendy was always organized. For years. That's how long my husband has been with this firm. In those 4 years, this firm has closed 11 major deals. I went through the press coverage, the client announcements, the industry profiles. She opened the folder not to read from it, but to let him see that it existed. That she had sat down and done the work. Juno's fingerprints are on 9 of those 11. The Lim account, the one you pulled him in on a Saturday for, he built that relationship personally. 18 months of his time, his energy, his talent, his weekends. She closed the folder. And yet somehow, when the press release went out for the preliminary agreement, his name appeared once in the 3rd paragraph in a list of 4 people. Director Shin's jaw was doing something tight and controlled. "The contributions of our entire team." "Your entire team." Wendy repeated it back to him with a soft, delighted incredulity, like he'd said something genuinely fascinating. "Your entire team. That's interesting because your entire team was not the one the Lim Group CFO called directly to course correct when the Q3 projections looked soft. That was my husband. I know because he took that call at 11:30 at night in our kitchen, and I brought him tea, and I heard enough to understand what was happening." She paused. "Your entire team is not who your clients request by name." That's also my husband. I'm not sure what you're hoping to accomplish. I'm getting there, don't worry. She held up one finger with the patience of a woman who had all the time in the world and was going to use every second of it. I want to talk about the day one account, because that one is interesting. She watched something shift very slightly in his expression and made a small note of it internally. From what I could piece together, the initial pitch framework, the one that won the account, was prepared almost entirely by Juno after the first approach failed. The first approach, incidentally, that was yours. He rebuilt the strategy over a 3-week period, largely on his own time, and the account signed. She looked at him pleasantly. You presented that strategy to the board. I don't have the internal documents, obviously. I'm just a woman who does real estate, but I'm good at connecting things. It's a professional habit. Director Shin was no longer trying to speak. He was, she observed, genuinely unsure of what was happening to him, which was exactly where she wanted him. Here's the thing that I think you may have miscalculated, Wendy said, and her voice shifted just slightly. Still warm, still controlled, but with an edge underneath it now, like something that had been waiting patiently to be said. You looked at my husband and you saw someone you could push, and I understand why. He is the kindest man I have ever met. He is patient and he is professional and he does not make scenes. He does not demand. He does not threaten. He shows up, he works, he delivers, and he goes home. She paused. What you did not account for is that he goes home to me. She picked up her bag. She smoothed her blazer. She stood up. He'll be tendering his resignation this week, she said. I've already looked into the relevant clauses in his contract regarding notice period and the non-solicitation terms, and I want you to know that we have spoken to a lawyer, so please make sure the process is handled correctly and that everything he's owed, including the lim account commission structure he was verbally promised 8 months ago, yes, I know about that too, is included in the final settlement. Director Shin stood. Mrs. Choi, if Juno has concerns, there are proper channels. He tried the proper channels. Her voice was still pleasant. Remarkably, unfailingly pleasant. He was told to be grateful for the opportunity. She smiled at him one more time, the full version, the one that reached her eyes and meant absolutely nothing reassuring. Thank you for your time, Director Shin. You have a lovely office. I do hope someone gets to enjoy that view. She walked out. She did not rush. She walked the length of the corridor at exactly the same pace she'd walked it going in, nodded to the receptionist, pressed the elevator button, and waited. When the elevator doors closed and she was alone, she exhaled once, long and slow, and then she pulled out her phone. She typed to Juno, "Are you still in the office?" His reply came in under a minute. "Just finishing something." "Why?" She typed back, "Come outside. I'm picking you up for lunch." She was leaning against her car when he came through the building's front doors, still in his coat, looking confused and slightly worried the way he always did when she appeared somewhere unexpected. "Wendy, what are you? Get in the car. I have a 2 o'clock. Juno." She looked at him over the roof of the car. Just looked at him. And something in her face told him everything he needed to know about how serious she was, because he closed his mouth, walked around to the passenger side, and got in. She drove them to the small restaurant 2 streets over that they'd found 6 months ago and kept meaning to go back to, the one with the good sundae and the window seats. She ordered for both of them because she'd already decided what they were eating, and she made sure there was tea on the table before she said a single word about why they were there. Then she told him everything. The research, the folder, the appointment under the wrong name, Director Shin's face. Every word she'd said and every word he'd managed to get in edgewise, which was not many. Juno sat across from her and listened. His expression moved through several things. Surprise, discomfort, something that flickered close to embarrassment. Then something that cracked open under that, something relieved and raw and exhausted all at once. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You went there," he said finally. "I did. Wendy. He called you at 7:43 on a Saturday and yelled at you." "I know, but..." "And that was just the part one witnessed personally." He looked at her. His jaw was tight, but his eyes were doing something entirely different from tight. They were bright, in that particular way that happened when Juno was feeling something he hadn't given himself permission to name yet. "I should have told you how bad it was getting. I know that. Why didn't you?" The question sat between them, quiet and without accusation. She watched him consider it. Watched him decide to tell her the truth instead of the easier thing. Because I didn't want you to think I couldn't handle it, he said. That I was just sitting there taking it because I didn't have the backbone to do anything about it. Wendy was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Baby. Her voice was soft in a way it only ever got for him. The most strong person I know is the one who keeps showing up, keeps delivering, keeps being excellent even when the people around him don't deserve it. That's not weakness. That's actually the thing that scares people like Shin. He knows he can't replicate what you do and it makes him small. She squeezed his hand. You are not small. You have never been small. You just needed someone to remind you. He turned his hand over under hers and held on. Also, she added after a perfectly timed pause, you need to quit that job. He laughed. A real one, sudden and full. The kind she'd been wanting to hear from him for weeks. It rearranged his whole face. She loved that laugh. She had married that laugh. Yeah, he said, still smiling, looking at their joined hands. I think I do. The resignation letter took Juno 40 minutes to write. Not because he didn't know what to say. Choi Juno had never struggled with words, which was part of what made him exceptional at what he did. The ability to take something complex and make it land with precision. It took 40 minutes because he kept stopping. Not from hesitation, not from doubt, but from something closer to the sensation of setting down a weight you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten it wasn't supposed to be there. Every paragraph he finished felt like another inch of space returning to his lungs. Wendy sat at the other end of their dining table with her laptop and her own work spread around her. Close enough to be present. Far enough to give him the room to do it himself. She'd learned that about him early. Juno didn't want to be managed through his emotions. He wanted company while he moved through them. So she answered emails and reviewed a property contract and occasionally reached over without looking up to slide his tea closer to his side of the table. And she let him write. When he finally turned the laptop toward her and said, "Read this." She read it. It was clean, professional, appropriately brief, and gave nothing away about what she had said in that office, which was correct because this was his letter, his voice, his exit, and it would carry none of her fingerprints unless he chose to put them there. It's perfect, she said, and meant it. He sent it that evening. Director Shin's response came the following morning and was, by all accounts, the reply of a man who had spent the night realizing several things he wished he'd realized sooner. It was professional. It was measured. It granted the full notice period with immediate release from active project responsibilities and confirmed a formal offboarding meeting for the end of the week. It did not apologize, but it also did not push back, which told her everything she needed to know about what had gone through his head. After she'd walked out of that office, Juno read it at the kitchen counter while she made breakfast. He set the phone down. He looked at her. He folded completely, he said. Of course he did. She slid a plate toward him. Eat. The weeks that followed had a texture that Wendy hadn't realized she'd been missing. Juno was home. Not physically home before 8 o'clock and mentally still in the office until midnight home. Present. Decompressing in real time, taking up the right amount of space in their apartment, leaving his shoes by the door and forgetting where he'd put his coffee and wandering into the kitchen at noon when she was on a call just to refill her water glass because he'd noticed it was empty. She hadn't realized how much she'd been stretching toward him over the past year. Leaning across a distance that had nothing to do with geography. Having him back in the full sense. Unhurried, unguarded, just Juno. Felt like something she hadn't known she was hungry for until she was full of it again. He slept properly for the first time in what she suspected was longer than either of them wanted to calculate. The first morning he woke up on his own, without an alarm, after 9 full hours. He lay there for a moment looking at the ceiling with the slightly bewildered expression of a man rediscovering a room he'd forgotten he lived in. She was already awake, watching him with quiet amusement from her side of the bed. How do you feel? She asked. He considered this with genuine seriousness. Like a person. That's a good start. He turned his head toward her. I forgot what this felt like. She reached over and pushed his hair back from his forehead. I know. I noticed. He caught her hand, held it against his face for a moment with his eyes closed. She let him. She sat with the full weight of how much she loved this man. Not the polished professional version that the world got, but this version, the undefended morning version, the one that held her hand and admitted things quietly, and she let herself feel it without rushing past it. Okay, he said eventually, opening his eyes. What's the plan? She smiled. I thought you'd never ask. The plan, as it turned out, had been developing in the back of Wendy's mind for considerably longer than the past 2 weeks. Real estate had taught her things that applied cleanly to almost everything else. How to read a market before it announced itself, how to identify value that other people were walking past, how to structure a deal so that every party felt they'd gotten something even when you'd gotten the most. She had built her business in Seoul from a single contact, one property, and a level of persistence that her Korean colleagues had initially found startling and eventually found indispensable. She was not afraid of starting things. She was very good at it. What she had recognized, watching Juno work for 4 years, was that he had something rarer than intelligence. He had the specific, unusual ability to make other people feel understood, clients, partners, colleagues, the skeptical CFO on the other end of a difficult call. He made people feel that their concerns had been heard and that the solution being offered was genuinely the right one. That was not a skill you could manufacture. That was not something you acquired in business school. That was Juno constitutionally in his bones, and it was the reason clients asked for him by name and the reason Director Shin had been able to exploit him so effectively. Talent like that didn't belong to a firm that didn't deserve it. Over 3 evenings at their dining table, with takeout containers between them and both their laptops open, they built the framework. She handled the structural and financial architecture. She knew those rooms, knew how capital moved, knew which doors to knock on and in what order. He handled the strategy side, the service model, the language of the pitch, the specific gap in the market that they'd both identified separately and kept returning to together. A boutique advisory firm, not trying to be everything to everyone. Specifically positioned, specifically excellent, with a client list that would be small enough to be cared for properly and selective enough to mean something. She watched him in those evenings and she saw the thing she loved most about him reassemble itself in real time. The precision of his thinking. The way he got quiet when an idea was forming and then spoke quickly when it had fully arrived. The way he'd suddenly stand up and walk to the window because he thought better on his feet, and then come back to the table with 3 sentences that completely reoriented what they were building. She let him lead the parts that were his to lead. She stepped in firmly on the parts that were hers. It felt, unexpectedly, like the best kind of collaboration. Not divided, not overlapping in the wrong places, but genuinely complementary. 2 people who were excellent at different things pointing those things in the same direction. We should call it something that doesn't sound like every other firm in Uedo, Wendy said on the 3rd evening, chin in her hand, looking at the brand document she'd started. Agreed. He was reading something on his screen. Something that sounds like it means something. It should mean something. She tapped her pen against the table. Not our names. I hate eponymous firms. They're too attached to the founders' egos. Says the woman who once named a property listing after herself. That was branding, Juno. Completely different. She pointed the pen at him. Focus. He hid his smile behind his coffee cup. They named it eventually, something clean, 2 words, architectural without being cold. It sounded like a decision, not an introduction. Wendy approved it after sitting with it for 24 hours, which was her process for everything she was serious about. The firm launched quietly. That was intentional. Wendy had learned that the most powerful entrances were not the loudest ones. They were the ones that made people feel they'd discovered something, rather than been sold something. She leveraged 3 existing relationships from her real estate network, people who trusted her judgment and were curious about what she was attached to now. Juno reached out to 2 former clients, not to poach, carefully, correctly, simply to let them know where he'd landed and what they were building. The first client signed within the month. The second followed 3 weeks later. By month 4, they had a waiting list. She did not say, I told you so. She did not need to. She said it in other ways, in the dinners she made when a deal closed, in the way she reached for his hand across the table at their first proper client dinner when she could see he was in his element and completely lit from the inside by it. She said it in the way she looked at him sometimes across a room when he didn't know she was watching, when he was talking and the person across from him was leaning forward, fully captured, completely won over, and she thought, there he is. That's the man I married. Look at him go. It was Juno's former colleague, a junior associate named Park Soo-min who had worked under him for 2 years and who had sent a warm, careful message the week of his resignation saying she was sorry to see him go and that he'd been the best senior she'd ever had, who mentioned the shares. She'd reached out again when she heard about the new firm, to congratulate him, and at the end of the message, almost as an afterthought, she'd written, I don't know if this is relevant, but I was doing some filing last month and I came across something with your name on it in the older corporate records. Shareholder documentation, I think. From a while back. I wasn't sure if you knew about it. Juno read the message and frowned. Wendy read it over his shoulder and immediately straightened. Call her, she said. It's probably nothing. My name is not uncommon. Juno, he called her. What Park Suman described carefully and with appropriate uncertainty was a set of founding shareholder documents from the firm's early incorporation. The firm, as it turned out, had not begun as the polished Uido institution it currently was. It had been founded 17 years ago by 3 men, one of whom, recorded in the original articles of incorporation under full legal name, was Choi Juno's father. The line was quiet for a moment. Thank you, Sumin, Juno said, very calmly. I appreciate you telling me. He hung up. He sat down. Wendy sat across from him and waited, because this was one of those moments that needed space before it needed anything else. My father was a founding partner, he said finally. He never told me. Do you know why he might not have? Juno was quiet for a long moment. He left the firm when I was about 12. There was a disagreement, he never fully explained it. He said the partnership had run its course. He stopped. I didn't know he'd had equity. He never said. Did he sell it? Juno looked up at her slowly. I don't know. They found out within the week, through a lawyer Wendy had been using for her real estate contracts and who came highly recommended for corporate matters. The answer, which arrived in a very composed phone call from a very composed legal professional, was that Choi Juno's father had not sold his founding shares. He had retained them, and upon his passing 4 years ago, the same year Juno had joined the firm, the year that Juno had taken that job partly to feel close to something his father had left behind without ever explaining, those shares had transferred, per the estate documentation, to his only son. Choi Juno had been a shareholder in the firm where he worked for 4 years. He had sat across the desk from Director Shin, been yelled at on Saturday mornings, had his strategies repositioned and his name buried in third paragraphs, while owning a founding stake in the institution that was doing all of it. Wendy found out the percentage figure on a Tuesday afternoon. She was in the kitchen when the lawyer called with the confirmed number. She thanked him, hung up, set her phone down on the counter, and stood there for a moment looking at the middle distance. Then she started laughing. Not the polite kind. Not the under-her-breath kind. The full kind, the real kind, the kind that built from somewhere deep and came up in waves, because sometimes the universe wrote a story so perfectly, so completely, so satisfyingly that the only appropriate response was laughter. Juno appeared in the kitchen doorway looking alarmed. What happened? What did he say? She turned around. Her eyes were bright. She was still smiling in that enormous, uncontrollable way that she almost never did. That was only for things that were really, genuinely, profoundly funny. Baby, she said, you own part of that firm. He stared at her. A significant part. She picked up her phone, turned it toward him so he could see the number she'd written in her notes app. A founding part. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then Juno sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically. Not from distress. Just, the chair was too far and his legs made a reasonable decision without consulting him. He sat on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet and looked at the number on her phone and then looked at nothing for a moment. Wendy crouched down in front of him, took his face in her hands. He looked at her. Your father left you something, she said softly. He just didn't get to tell you about it. Something moved through his expression. She watched it happen, let it happen, didn't try to redirect it or hurry it past. He had spent 4 years at that firm carrying something he couldn't name, some pull toward a place he didn't fully understand, and now he did. It didn't fix the grief. Grief wasn't a thing that got fixed, but it gave it a shape, a reason, something his father had left behind that had led him, in the end, to exactly where he was supposed to be. What do we do with it? He asked. Wendy stood up. She held out her hand. He took it and she pulled him off the kitchen floor with the efficiency of a woman who had places to be. We collect it, she said simply. Every single thing that's owed. The lawyer described the process as unusually straightforward for a situation of this complexity, which Wendy took to mean that the documentation was clean and Director Shin's face upon receiving the formal shareholder notification had not been straightforward at all. They did not make a scene of it. That was not their way, or rather, Wendy had already made her scene, had said everything that needed saying in that corner office with the river view, and now this was simply the administration of what was right. The shares were transferred properly, the valuations assessed, the dividends that had accumulated and never been distributed to the rightful holder, because no one had known, or perhaps because someone had chosen not to look too carefully, were calculated and documented. It was, when it was finalized, a figure that made their lawyer clear his throat twice before reading it aloud. Juno donated a portion of it in his father's name to a foundation that supported first-generation business students, which was so completely and exactly him that Wendy had had to excuse herself from the table for 30 seconds when he told her, because she was not going to cry in a lawyer's office, she had a reputation to maintain. The rest went into the new firm, into the infrastructure of the thing they were building together, the thing that was theirs, not inherited, not borrowed, not extracted from someone else's effort. Earned, built, decided on together at their dining table with takeout containers. And 2 laptops and the specific electricity of 2 people who believed in each other without qualification. On the evening after everything was finalized, they went back to the restaurant with the good sundae and the window seats. The same one she'd driven them to on that Monday when she'd picked him up outside the building and told him to get in the car. They sat at the window. The city moved outside in its bright, relentless way. Juno had his hand on the table, palm up, and she put hers in it without thinking, the way she always did, the way that had never once required thought. "I want to say something," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead. That day you picked me up." He looked at her. "When you told me what you'd done, what you'd said to him." A pause. "I think I knew then, I think I'd known for a long time, that you saw me more clearly than I saw myself. And I kept waiting until I was in a better position to tell you what was going on. Until I had it handled. Until I'd sorted it." He shook his head slightly. "As if you were someone I needed to manage the optics for." "Juno, let me finish." He said it gently. "I am never doing that again. Whatever it is. Good, bad, embarrassing, unresolved. You're my person and you deserve the unedited version. Every time." He squeezed her hand. "I'm sorry it took me this long to say that." She looked at him for a long moment. This man. This specific, particular, irreplaceable man who had thought she might find him weak for struggling, who had been protecting her from information she'd had every right to, who had been carrying something alone out of love and gotten it exactly wrong and was now looking at her with his whole heart visible in his face. "For the record," she said, "I knew something was wrong for about 5 months before any of this." He blinked. 5 months. "You stopped humming in the kitchen. You hum when you're happy and you stopped. I clocked it in November." She tilted her head. "I was waiting for you to come to me, and then a man called at 7:43 on a Saturday and yelled at you, and I ran out of patience." He stared at her. "You noticed I stopped humming. I notice everything about you. That's what I signed up for." Something in his face went very soft and very certain at the same time. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to the back of it, and she let him, and the city moved outside, and the food arrived, and they ate at the window in the kind of easy, anchored, unperformable quiet that only exists between people who have chosen each other completely. Through the ordinary days and the hard ones, through the things left unsaid and the things eventually said, through Saturday mornings that went wrong and Tuesday afternoons when the universe finally showed its whole hand. They had started with love. They had built with love. And what they had now, the firm, the finalized papers, the shares that had waited 17 years to find their way home, the future that was entirely and only theirs, was just love made structural. Love made permanent. Love that had decided to become something you could stand on. Wendy Jackson Choi had always known she was going to build something extraordinary. She just hadn't anticipated that the best thing she'd ever build would be a life.
Hello besties, in this story we learned that stop suffering in silence to protect your image. The people truly love you don't need you to have it all figured out before you come to them. Juno almost lost his peace, his health, and his joy trying to look strong for the woman who will have burned the whole office down for him from day one. Talk to your person, let them in. Your silence is not protecting them. It is just making you carry things alone that were never meant to be carried alone. Thank you so much for watching. Kindly like, subscribe, and share.